I think tonight we ought to emphasize the name of our organization, the Honeoye Falls Mendon Historical Society. And this is the first opportunity that we've had to ask officials from any unit of the town of Mendon to come over and participate officially in a program. We're delighted that they're here. Perhaps you've been watching me look at this book. This is one of the favorite books, and one of my favorites of all my lifetime. It's called As You Pass By. And it is 90% the story of the Volunteer Firemen's Museum at 59 Maiden Lane, New York City. Of course, 90% of the contents of this book also pertains to the city of New York. But it has to do with the very beginnings of volunteer organizations, which we enjoy both here in Honeoye Falls and in Mendon. I was surprised to find through research that volunteer fire companies are decreasing in this country. They are becoming professional, even to hiring only one or two or half a dozen firemen. So we are still historically represented by volunteer fire companies in both ends of our community. I just want to read a paragraph here in the foreword, which I think is very nice and pertains to volunteer firemen. And it has to do with the history. Perhaps one of the best ways of recapturing the quality of those long vanished days in the life of any community is through the eyes of those who in their times knew their community best, the volunteer firemen. Many people do not realize the importance of early firefighting in the political and social life of a community during the period of the volunteers. For more than 100 years, these adventurous and self-sacrificing fellows, who counted among themselves many leading citizens and businessmen, hauled their machines either by hand or by horse or later by motor through the shortcuts of every community to protect property, life and property. And in reference to New York City, 9 of New York City's mayors were active members of the volunteer fire company. No one can better learn the true character and makeup of a community or fully appreciate the real love for that community than by following the firemen and the fire runners through the byways of their land, who stood shoulder to shoulder with their firefighters against the demon fire to save life and property. During the time that I was privileged to get together some materials for a book for Honeoye Falls, I touched briefly on the fire company in Mendon, but I didn't do any sort of a job because that wasn't my purpose at the time that I got the book together on Honeoye Falls. Like all of history in these small western villages and towns, there is a great lack of history written down through the years. So it's a matter of research and writing to state organizations, firemen's organizations, and so forth. We had 2 men from the Honeoye Falls Department invited here tonight who accepted. One was called out of town, the other is ill. But we are fortunate in having one of the most active and most dedicated firemen that I have known in the 35 years that I've lived in this community. And it's my privilege to introduce first the representative from the Honeoye Falls Fire Department from Honeoye Falls, Bill Caves. Please, Bill.
Thank you. And first of all, I want to give you a number, all of you. I'm not going to dwell too much on history. I'll cover a little bit of history. You've got a lot more of it here than I actually realized that you had. And then I'd like to bring you up to date as to our present officers and what the fire company is today. So mine isn't all history. Maybe these other gentlemen can be all history. But the number I want to leave with you tonight, if I don't leave anything else, is a number that should be imprinted in your mind very, very deeply. And always remember it until somebody changes it. Remember the number, 232-2121. That'll get you fire or ambulance in the town of Mendon. So remember that number, 232-2121. To go back in history, Honeoye Falls, or this section of the country, had no firefighting organization as such until February 10th, 1885, when, after several disastrous fires, a special election was held, and it was voted to appropriate the sum of $5,500 for the founding of a volunteer fire department. This sum was spent in the purchase of a fire engine, and on May 6, 1885, volunteers met and organized the department, and the following companies were designated. And one of them, you have their streamer over here. There was the Wilcox Steamer Company, later changed to the Honeoye Falls Steamer Company. The Major Downey Hook and Ladder Company, the Active Hose Company No. 1, and the LaBelle Hose Company No. 2, later known as the Protectives. Now, all of those companies were dissolved in the early 40s or the late 30s. I don't know the exact date, but they were dissolved before the end of World War II, and one company was organized from that. Now, the Iron Man, which Honeoye Falls is quite noted for, and you have some of the history of the Iron Man, and I won't delve too deep in it, but it became the possession of Honeoye Falls from the Avon Fire Department, and has been tried to be taken away several times, and Honeoye Falls has always been able to save it. Honeoye Falls Fire Department operates under different rules and regulations than the Mendon Fire Department does. And I will touch briefly on the actual organization. Our fire department in Honeoye Falls is what is known as a village fire department, and it serves at the pleasure of the village trustees. And one of the Title III of the actual charter, I suppose, of the village of Honeoye Falls, in Charter 3, paragraph 20, was to establish and organize a fire department, the officers and members of which at all times shall be subject to removal by the trustees, prescribe the powers and duties of both officers and members, and shall at all times be under the subject of the control of the trustees. The president and trustees shall, by virtue of their office, be fire wardens of said village, and they and each of them, as said fire warden, shall, when present at the occurrence of any fire, have general supervisory power and authority to direct officers and members of the department and other persons present at any such fire, and in such manners as shall be prescribed by the bylaws. Which means, in essence, that when it comes right down to it, that the mayor and the trustees of the village of Honeoye Falls are the actual, well, I don't know if you call them the chief, but they are the, have full control, and they do delegate this. And one of the chapters in Chapter 4 on the fire department of the village was that the members of the fire department shall elect at such time and in such manner as the trustee shall direct the chief engineer and one or more assistant engineers of the fire department, whose election shall be subject to approval by the trustees, and who may be removed by said trustees for incompetency, neglect of duty, or misconduct. The trustees shall have power to procure fire engines and other apparatus for the extinguishing of fires in said village, and have charge and control of the same. Under the present bylaws of the fire department, they have a chief, who at the present time is Harvey Fuller, 2 battalion chiefs, who are Leonard Tripp and William Tenney, 2 captains, which are James Fisher and Melvin Buckland, and 3 lieutenants, Ted Alfieri, Tom Rotunda, and Alfred Ford, and 2 wardens, who are Dick Bach and myself, and Secretary Treasurer, who is Cy Grace. Now, These make up the actual working leaders of the fire department. The chief, the 2 battalion chiefs, and the 2 wardens are the directors. And they're the ones who are responsible for the administration of the fire department, not the actual firefighting. The chief, of course, doubles in 2 capacities. The wardens are just the policy-making group, so to speak. We have 1 fireman who has been active and is still active today since back in the early 1900s, and that's Cy Grace. Cy was to be with you tonight, but he is incapacitated. Now, the village of Honeoye Falls sells protection to some outlying districts. In other words, we have a Mendon protected district which goes out Clover Street to the Pittsford line and goes over towards Mendon Center and comes up against the Mendon Fire District. We also sell protection to the town of Lima, up and around Corby Road and in that area, and outside of the number 6 road. And then we also sell protection to the town of West Bloomfield, and that encompasses all of the North Bloomfield Water District. So Honeoye Falls sells protection. Now, under the structure, Honeoye Falls' money is raised by taxation on the people in the village, and also the money that is arrived by selling protection. Now, this is not true in the Mendon district. Mendon levies a fire tax, and everyone in the district pays the same amount of money. I will not talk about the virtues of it because I think it's a political matter. I want to get into talking politics. But Honeoye Falls, being an old company, operates under a village charter without any board of fire commissioners. They have a fire commissioners, which I'm sure their men will talk about. In 1964, with the departure of any type of ambulance protection, the fire department entered into an agreement, or the village entered into an agreement with the town of Mendon, and now we sell them ambulance protection through the entire town. In other words, to get an ambulance, which is maintained by the village, we call that same number 232-2121. So Honeoye Falls' ambulance provides ambulance protection to the entire town, and the Mendon Fire District pays the village of Honeoye Falls a set fee for this service. And it's also helped at all times by the Mendon emergency truck. So that is the reason that you have an overlapping of service. Now, the ambulance group has a cadre, or is allowed 30 members. I think we stand at 28 at the present time. Our fire company has a quota of 100, and I think we have some 96 or 7 members on our rolls at the present time. Our company operates 1 750-gallon pumper, 1 pumper tanker, which has 1,200 gallons of water, and also a 750-gallon tank or pump. A ladder truck, which is equipped with a 750-gallon pump, and also a numerous amount of ladders. An emergency truck, and an ambulance. On the emergency truck is all our lighting and rescue equipment. By that we have power generators, we have a power hacksaw, all the gruesome type of equipment that's needed to remove someone who was pinned in an accident or anything like that. That's all carried in here. You are also protected by a mutual aid program, which is probably one of the best in the United States. The County of Monroe is divided into 5 battalions. And Honeoye Falls is on what's called the 5th Battalion, and Mendon is in the 3rd Battalion. The 5th Battalion comprises all the fire companies from Clover Street to the Genesee River, and from the Livingston County line to the city of Rochester. That encompasses Brighton, or West Brighton, all the Henriettas, the State School of Industry, Rush, Honeoye Falls. Now these battalions work, have their own coordinator and so forth, and on a large fire they work between themselves. We, being so close to Mendon, work back and forth with Mendon, even though they're not in our battalion, and get protection from Mendon rather than protection from someone in our own battalion. Also, we have a mutual aid agreement with Lima, West Bloomfield, between counties. We also have the same mutual aid agreement as far as ambulances is concerned. If we need one or several more ambulances, we can call East Bloomfield or Lima, East or Avon or Rush. Any of these ambulances can come in for a major accident. The alerting system now, since the telephone left Honeoye Falls and the impersonal service of being able to call Stella O'Neill or somebody and say, "Where's the fire?" is now done maybe in a more efficient manner, although I liked it quite often because she'd tell me right where it was and I didn't have to worry. Matter of fact, sometimes they'd call me and tell me where it was before I ever picked up the phone. But today we are all dispatched by radio. And when you call that number that I gave you, 232-2121, it comes back to Honeoye Falls as a form of a radio message. And there's an excess of 60 radios in the firemen's homes which automatically open any signal is given to alert you that it is opening. At the same time, the fire whistle blows, all done by the marvels of electronics in this year. And the voice message tells us where the fire is or where the ambulance call is. Done at a slight cost to the village, but very slight, by the county of Monroe. And it all is done in one building in Rochester, and the same dispatcher dispatches all the equipment within the county. I'd be happy to answer any questions that anybody has. As far as the history is concerned, I am not too well versed on the history, only living here about 25 years, but I do remember a few things about the last 25, at least. Dave?
Thank you, Bill. Are there any questions of Mr. Cade? Well, that's a very fine presentation, Bill. This mutual aid is the most remarkable thing that I've ever seen. When I joined the Hook and Ladder Company in 1934, as Bill told you, there were 4 different units in this Honeoye Falls Fire Department. Now there's one, and yet help comes not only from our neighbors of Mendon, but from many, many miles around. And it comes in a matter of minutes. So we can consider ourselves very fortunate in this type of protection. Now, Mendon Fire Company is in Mendon, of course, right near the old academy. It's a part of the old academy, the Mendon Academy. Very lovely building, architecturally beautiful. And I don't know enough about the department to even make the proper introductions, but I'm pleased to be able and privileged to introduce the men from Mendon. I will introduce all 4 first, and then ask Chief Scott to call on the respective gentlemen if they have anything to say. First, we have the present Chief, Don Scott, right here. And then Art Sheeler, an old fireman, is Chief of the Police Fire Department in Mendon. Art Sheeler. Jim Singleton is Captain in the Mendon Fire Company. And Howard Stanley is the immediate past Chief of the Fire Company in Mendon. Chief? Commissioner. Chief Don Scott, I'll ask you to introduce your subject.
Well, we brought along this album. It's mostly up to date on some of the projects we've been into in the last few years, our carnival, and show some of our trucks on that. And being chief, I can delegate out some of the jobs which I don't really care about. That's public speaking, and so I'd like you to introduce my captain, Jim Singleton, which has the history of the Mendon Fire Department.
Thank you.
I've been here about 4 years. So what I have today, or tonight, is a very good history of the Mendon Fire Department. And tonight, as I was looking over it, I was going to shorten it a brief bit. And when I went over to Don's house to pick it up, I saw his wife there typing madly away. I told her that, boy, I think I'll make a few notes, because this looks awfully long. And she looked at me and glared at me. She said, after I've worked on this all day long, you better present it. So if you'll bear with me, I'm going to read this. It's very good. It shouldn't take too long. In 1914, the Mendon Fire Department was started by several women in town who realized that after a rather serious fire, that there was no protection at all for their homes, their barns, which was their business, but they were all farmers. So they grouped together and they formed the Mendon Fire Department. At that time, it was just Mendon Protectives or whatever they choose to call it. In that group was Mrs. Ann Furlong, Mrs. Addison Hodge, Mrs. Excel Murphy, Mrs. Fred Shelders, Mrs. Fred Barrett. And they held a series of ice cream socials to raise money to protect the district. With this money, they bought pails and ladders and axes and those few weapons they could afford at the time. And in about 1934, they acquired a shed behind the Presbyterian Church to house the equipment that they were able to muster together. Right after they were forming the company in 1914, in 1917, a crude hand pumper was purchased. This was a 16-man pumper, 8 men to a side. You have a picture of, I believe you have a picture of that type of pumper over the side here. That piece of equipment was first used in 1921 when the Furlong hardware store fire occurred in Mendon, New York. Although the building was severely damaged, it was saved by the volunteers, and that operation was directed by a member of the Rochester Fire Department that just happened to be passing by at the time. I wasn't any chief. In 1920, a Model T Ford was purchased, and I don't understand this, but they bought a spare motor at the same time.
No faith in Ford.
Buster Barnes and Earl Broomfield, who you all know, arranged this mechanical device. That served the company up until 1932. In 1932, the first organization meeting was held, and by the way, that's exactly 40 years ago this year, so we have an anniversary coming up. A special committee was formed for raising funds, and again, Earl Broomfield was in that group. He was a chairman. Addison Hodge was secretary. Wallace Haubecker, Herb Zuber, Ethan Fletcher served on that committee. In June of '32, the first official and modern piece of fire equipment was purchased, that being a 1932 Chevrolet. That was bought from Bank Chevrolet in Rush for $482. It's quite a change from today's pumpers, which go about $60,000. Buffalo pump was put on that truck, and that was bought from Fred Dunn. In April 1933, the Mendon Fire Department held its first election of officers, and those were elected President and Chairman Earl Broomfield, Secretary Addison Hodge, Treasurer Wallace Haubecker, Chief Fred Sen, Assistant Chief Buster Barnes. And in 1934, Clifford Collins was elected First Assistant Chief, Barman's Second Assistant Chief. At the time, 32 Chevrolet was purchased. The Presbyterian Church started tearing down their horse sheds, which were behind the church at that time. And the fire department moved to a building across from Broomfield's Hardware, which now houses the beauty parlor and a few apartments. In 1935, the Mendon Fire District was incorporated, and it agreed to assess the fire district for $500 a year. That's quite a difference from what we have now. And in February 8, 1936, the old horse barn used as firehouse was auctioned off by Wallace Hallbecker, purchased by Vince Lee for $118, and that building is still used by Vince, and it's behind his house at 51 Mendon. 1936, the Mendon firemen held their first carnival with Wallace Hallbecker as general chairman. Proceeds netted approximately $400. Carnivals were held for many years with Wally Hallbecker acting as general chairman. Last year we initiated our carnival, and the proceeds from last year were about $1,200. Weren't they, Commissioner?
No, a little bit more than
A
that.
little more than that? Well, 3 times what they had here. The first year they initiated the carnivals. 37, George Shue, I guess that's Shue, was elected chief. Buster Barnes, first assistant. Clifford Collins, second assistant. 1941, a squad car was purchased, and that was built and assembled by the Rochester Fire Equipment Company. Peerless truck? And to help pay for that, why round and square dances were held at the Mendon Graves for many years. There's a note here, and you people may remember this, Cornellsville's Hillbillies.
I remember the name.
Provided music for those square dances. The lease expired on the firehouse they were using at that time in 1941. It was rented for a short time for about $5 a month. 1944, another building was purchased by the fire company. That was up on the Mendon-Pittsford Road, 1381. That building now is occupied by Bill Baldwin, his wife. Vince Lee took over as chief in 1946, replacing George Shue. And in 1947, Clayton Shoemaker served as chief. 1950, our international truck that's still in service, engine 66, was purchased from Dunn Oil Company, and that was sent to Buffalo to be fitted out as a fire truck. That truck has a 500-gallon minute pump and a 500-gallon booster tank. That truck was white at the time, and was equipped with all the hoses, helmet, boots, and those equipment you need to fight that fire. The Cobblestone Schoolhouse was acquired. That must have been about 1950. It was donated to the fire district by the school district in September that year. An addition was added to that building. That addition, by the way, has the cobblestone type of construction to keep the rest of the building. And the firemen moved in November of 1951. In January of that same year, Howard Evans took over as chief and served as chief for 11 years until December 1960. In 52, a squad car was purchased. That was purchased before that time. 52 was sold to the Bristol Center for $50. In mid-1950, a 1,200-gallon tanker was purchased, and that tank was put in 1941 Ford, and that served the district for quite a few years. In 1958, our dress blue uniforms were purchased, and hardly is that uniform on. And that's the parade, the uniforms we use today in our parades. I forgot to mention Honeoye's uniform now. This is the original uniform of the Mendon Fire Company. And several of the members the last year or so have cleaned these uniforms up and do use them in parade from time to time. In 1963, a bond issue was voted upon to buy the 1964 Ford pumper, engine 67. That truck was equipped in Battle Creek, Michigan. And in '64, several members from the company went to Battle Creek to take delivery of the pumper and drive it back to Mendon. Don and Howie were two of the fellows that went to Michigan to pick up that truck. Also in '64, a Dodge four-wheel drive power wagon was purchased. That's our best. 1966 and 67. And in that year, our truck engine 66 was painted from white to red. And it's interesting that at that time, in the mid-1960s, all fire trucks were red. Now as all things have changed, and now we're going back to the yellows and the whites. We were so popular 34 years ago. Don Scott was elected chief in 68 and served for 2 years. During that time, the fire department bought the 1932 Chevrolet, which was our second pumper. We replaced the Ford Model T. That truck was sold to Chester Fredericks to use in his turf farm. And in 68, that truck was bought back by the department and completely restored. And with the red uniforms, it goes to many of our parades. In 1950, Howard Stanley took over as chief. During his 2 years, we initiated the carnival and our ham festivals. And last year, the firemen helped the Catholic Church in building the pavilion, which is, you have pictures of in the photo. And then in January 72, Don Scott was elected chief again to serve a 2-year term. There's an interesting note here to climax this brief talk, and that is that with all the equipment we have, in Mendon we have 2 pumpers, an emergency truck, and a grass fire truck. We have 55 firemen. Last Friday, we had a fire on Parish Road. And with all the modern conveniences and all the training that the firemen get, and they do get quite a bit, why, the ravages of the weather, as you remember, that was quite a windy day, and the fact that water is the necessary part to fight any fire, that house was lost. So it's interesting that the fire service is still needed, and the equipment can't replace some of the essentials that are needed for fighting fire. Thank you very much.
Could you tell us some more about Parish Road?
Parish Road, our chief was there. I arrived. I didn't make it to the fire, unfortunately. But as I understand it, the fire started in the basement, and Mendon got there in a very few minutes, and the fire up to a point was under control, completely under control, until an oil tank in the basement exploded.
Oh.
So is
And
that the
with-
big explosion? We saw that.
With the water in the basement and the fuel oil floating on top of the water, why, it became a new fire and went out of control. The unfortunate thing was the firemen could not get into the home because the floors were burned out. So the fire had to be fought from the outside.
And are there fire hydrants in Parish Road?
The closest fire hydrant is at the corner of
Mendon and-
Walk Mill Road and the Mendon Honeoye.
We tank water from...
Yeah, to fill. I saw you filling the tanker there.
Probably, I might mention a little something right now as far as fire police is concerned. You see me stand on the corner, and I want to let you know, this is the most essential, folks. We're not there for be mean or miserable. We not let you see. We're trying to do a job so these fellows and these trucks come back and forth. I happened to drive up, and Don was in the yard. They had the fire almost under control, and just a few minutes later, then all just popped. We had one of our boys lose some singe his hair and got blew out the celery, but other than that, it was kind of a mean thing to handle.
We do owe thanks to Honeoye Falls. We did call for mutual aid. Honeoye Falls, Ionia, Egypt,
Away from Egypt, and Fishers.
Fisher.
You saved the barn that was close to the house.
And those boys,
Garage was all right.
the garage was all right hooked on the house.
Something that happened after it was pretty well over with these, they're kind of long hair with beards were living in that, four guys and a girl.
Two dogs and a cat.
And I looked once and Abe's here was sitting in one of the windows. Well, they wanted to go in the part that was still standing, and so I got a light. This was after dark. I got a light and went in. Just about in the window he was sitting in earlier in that afternoon, he reached up in the crack of the window and he kept monkeying around, and so I got him a stick and he fished out a whole lot of bills, and they were $1,000, $100, and we saved that.
And guess who was sitting in the window?
I didn't know it was there.
On mutual aid, does the closest town move in? For instance, you're called Honeoye Falls, then does Fishers move in, or, I mean, does the closest?
It's up to the chief or who he calls, really. See, our district in Mendon, actually with the four corners, you can quarter it. And it, like, if it's on the other side towards the thruway, I would work more with Pittsburgh, probably the 3rd Battalion. The 3rd Battalion reaches all the way to Penfield. There's 9 companies in that, and Fishers, and we work out of the county.
All right, all right, for instance, you fellows are gone on to a fire. Then Pittsburgh, do they send a truck in to set at the firehouse, or are you just connected?
If all of our trucks leave the hall, then we call for a filling.
And they come right there and stay?
Right, and they have a crew right on, and they stay at all times while the fire is going on until we release them.
Who was the woman in Mendon that's doing the calling? That's what I was wondering.
That was Barbara Helm the other night, or the other afternoon.
I just wondered, I don't know, it just sounded funny, a woman on it.
Well, no, it's money that you found.
These 4 along here.
The guys that lived in that house, they were going to go to Florida, I think this week, and they've taken $3,500. The guy said that they'd taken $3,500 out of the bank, and I think they went in again, and they looked pretty happy. So I think they got more than $1,000. But they said 1,500 of it did burn up in another section of the house. But why anybody would have that much cash laying in their house? But it was really too bad that that tank had to blow up. It was in the basement, and it blew up, and then the flames went through the floor. It was in the partitions and that thing.
I was going to ask, what happened to the conventions they used to have in small towns around here?
Oh, they still have it.
Oh, do they?
Oh, yeah.
I can remember hearing my brother talk.
No,
The good times they had.
Western New York Convention, North Central Convention.
Oh, it's coming up in Rockport, I think,
Yeah.
Western, it's next year.
I just heard about
No,
it.
aren't you talking about conventions or carnivals?
No, convention, they used to call them convention.
Yeah, that's more silly if they have more stuff.
Yeah,
That's a word.
that's taken in like Western New York or Central New York, the conventions do it, and quite educational programs and all. The guys can go to.
Do you men use the fireman's home in Hudson, or do you have another one in Western New York?
No, that's
Covers
for
the
the
whole
whole
The
state.
whole state?
That's the whole state.
I used to live in the Hudson River Valley, and I'm very familiar with it because most of my family were firemen. But I thought possibly that there was another one in this part of this.
No, it's all on that.
Chief, is there anyone else you're going to call on, or you're going to say something else yourself?
No, that's how he is.
Howie?
Is that the only difference between the protectives and in the Mendon department? Is the fact that one's run by the trustees and one's run by the...
It's basically the same rules, it's just a different governing body, that's all. One is elected, your commissioners are elected by the people, the taxpayers, and they are same here, only they're the town board.
They run cheaper, their rates are a lot cheaper than ours.
Village? Well, you ought to make us a village then, maybe.
They are.
I don't want to get into that, that's a political hassle, I don't care.
I just wondered if that was the only difference, that was all.
I regretted it many times, but we didn't, for some reason, make away with that old hand pumper that Mr. Singleton spoke about. But I remember that fire, the one and only fire, that pumper that I remember when it was used, and that was down to the chutes. Henry Chute, we lived there for...
Parsons.
Huh?
Parsons?
No. Right down next to Eddie Butz's. Was it George Hoover's place? No.
Taylor Road.
Yeah, it's right there on Taylor Road. They had the bucket
Where
brigade.
Armstrong lives.
That's
That was a shoe.
That's the shoe place, where Armstrong is. I remember that fire down there, and that's the old hand pumper. That's the first time I ever, and the only time I was using operating.
Gentlemen, thank you. I congratulate you, sir, on that shirt still fitting you. I can remember we wore blue shirts back in '34. If I ever found mine, I couldn't get it over my head. There is a great deal of romance and color in volunteer fire company, plus the heartaches and the hard work. This is an old Curry-and-Ives printing called The Life of a Fireman. I understand the original of this is worth about $1,500. My birthday is coming up in March. If anyone has one, I'll be glad to get it. I want to add one more, talking about romance and color. I was privileged to know two of the men from Honeoye Falls who went to Avon and got the Iron Man in October 1891. One was Cap Pierce, and the other was a gentleman named Harry Pillsbury. And they were both wonderful gentlemen, and I tried to milk them as much as I could about the event of that night and the night before. As you know, they went one night and were caught. That is, they lost a ladder, but they got away. And they went back the next night, and that night they got the Iron Man.
They didn't
bought
steal
it here at Honeoye.
They didn't steal it, did they?
Oh, yeah. They bought it to Price Hardware Store and changed it to a counter, and two men guarded it while the other fellows came down to the Wilcox house. They stayed it most of the night, I guess, and they remembered where the Iron Man was, but it was then rebuilt, of course, and made solid metal, put on a Swedish bar, steel bar, and was placed on the steeple about 1891. Today, unfortunately, it's deteriorating. The face is rusted off, the cap, or the peak of the cap is rusted off. But that Iron Man, ladies and gentlemen, doesn't represent only Honeoye Falls. It represents every volunteer fire company in the world, because that's why it's called the Iron Man. And these fellows that are in volunteer fire companies deserve every bit of credit for the fine work they do. They're represented by that figure right up on our little column. Yes, sir.
Back in 1940, 46 and 47, we had an Iron Man who was named Chrome Sam.
Yeah, I remember that.
We won that from Rush at the Henrietta Carnival. And I happened to be a banner boy at that time. And we brought it home. It was on top of my father's gas station for a couple days. And they decided they were going to come over and get it. It accidentally disappeared. They never came around to get it. Then we held a carnival that following year. It was up on Howard Havens's, and they went up for same thing. You had it. Well, now they've run it way out of line. In order to get Chrome Sand, you got to participate in around about 4 different firemen's feats. One is a tournament. Second is a parade. Well, I don't know what the rest of them are. Well, anyway, they go on a point system. But that's not the way that thing was first designed. The gentleman put it up as supposed to be for a tug of war. And a lot of the men that, well, Vince Lee was in on it. I can name pretty near the whole squad of men that got that over in Henrietta. And the object of it was supposed to be a tug of war for Chrome Sam. And it was supposed to be passed around the county. Went from Mendon to Henrietta, and they hung on to it. My golly, the last time I seen it was back in, about 1960, 62. We were over there to a parade, and they had it on top of a truck. They had it chained down like brakes. They couldn't get it out of there. Well, they went and set up this, the way they wanted to disperse of it, and it was done with tournaments and parade. Well, which on small companies, that isn't the way the thing was really set up. It was set up so that everybody could have a crack at it and a tug of war. And I always had it in my mind that someday I'm going to get Chrome Sam back to good old Mendon. But the object of it is, I don't know how I'm going to get it. But I don't know. See, I had some photos of that. We had it for almost 2 years, and I don't even know where it is now. Last time I knew it was down in Point Pleasant. But they went out of line on it. It was supposed to be for a tug of war. That's how it got. Well, some of these guys, you probably remember, Vern Tobin, Vince Lee, Hermline, and there was another one over around Lima, or over around Rush there. He worked for Don L Company. He was another Lee brother. Skinner Hunt, my dad, Vern Colvin. Oh, yeah. I can't remember who the rest of them were. Well, anyway, Hank Gable and Dean Gable. They all went over that night of that parade, and they brought that up, and by golly, first of all, the guy was supposed to elect the team, and when he got around to get the team, he gave up on the deal. He didn't want nothing to do with it. So Ben says, I'll bet you I can beat you. And he rounded up some men, and by golly, they didn't come home with it. I almost flipped, right? So they had it all in the back of the car, and away they went. They won it. Best 2 out of 3. Yeah, we had that for a whole year.
Wonderful. Well, gentlemen, both Honeoye Falls and Mendon, we're very, very grateful to you. We want you to participate more in this particular organization. If at any time you have anything you'd like to have us preserve for you, please consider giving it to us. President John, thank you very much for letting me represent you.
Thank you very much. Very well, Dave.